mean, in my sort of perfect first lady world, there would be someone who was very upfront about their appreciation for American design, someone who recognized it as, at minimum, a $30 billion industry that employs massive numbers of people, and that is a reflection of who we are as a culture. And I think if that piece of it could become more prominent and they could be more comfortable with that, then I think we'd all be better for it, because there would be less of this sense that they're being judged solely based on how they look.
But Michelle Obama's going to have to walk a bit of a tightrope, don't you think, between, everybody. It's like people want her to be fashionable, but if she's too fashionable, then they're going to call her on it. That she's going to be, that she's going to. You get this sense that this way is going to have to be found. That, especially with the economy the way it is, if she, it's like her inaugural dress. I can't imagine you talk about pressure. She had pressure for the night he won the election, but can you imagine for the inauguration? I guess you think, well, maybe she could wear a different dress for every ball. That would satisfy, every taste. But have you heard any rumors about who is doing the dress?
I've heard rumors. They're unsubstantiated rumors.
Well, share.
I will address the piece about sort of walking that fine line. And you're right. I mean, she does have to walk that fine line. I think she's done a really excellent job of it. And the only reason that I would say that perhaps it's not quite that difficult has to do with the fact that she has to buy her own clothes. And she's looking at clothes from the perspective of someone for whom, the sky isn't the limit. And so it makes sense that one day she might be wearing a $1,000 designer dress, and the next day she's wearing something from J. Crew. And I think that's the way that most women,
and she looks good in J. Crew,
think about their clothes. Maybe they do splurge on one terrifically expensive piece, and then they fill it out with things that are less expensive. And that's part of why I think people are so drawn to her, that they feel that they sort of get her sensibility. Even if they don't want to copy it, I think they feel like they understand it. And the other thing is that, which I think has been great, is she wears a lot of lesser known designers, designers who are younger and whose businesses are just
Who are the
starting
designers
out.
she seems to favor other than
Well,
Narciso Rodriguez?
I think it's interesting that she's worn Isabel Toledo, who's been around for years and has a very tiny business, is known for being a very artful and thoughtful designer who really doesn't follow the beat of trends and sort of the demands of the fashion industry, so to speak. She's a real iconoclastic designer, I think. She's worn Takun Panical, who's a young designer whose business is maybe 4 years old, 3 years old, something like that. And he's really a sportswear designer. His dresses probably sell for $1,000, give or take. And this is not a guy who's hanging in every department store. And for him to see his work, on that kind of national stage is enormous. I mean, this is not a designer who can afford to buy advertising. So it means a tremendous amount to him.
Who else does she like?
She's worn J. Crew. She's worn her a local Chicago designer, Maria Pinto. Some of her jewelry has been by people like Erickson Beeman and Tom Binns, who one of the things I loved about it is that he sort of describes his work as inspired by Salvador Dali and things like that. So I don't know when the last time we've had a first lady who wears Dali-esque jewelry.
Every National Gallery will like that. But do you see in any of those designers she's favored that possibly, have you heard that she might be choosing one of them for the inaugural dress, or would she be going outside that circle too?
I mean, what I've heard is that there is that younger designers have been asked to make their suggestions. So she's not just looking at the usual suspects. She's not just looking at people like Oscar de la Renta or Carolina Herrera.
When do you expect that it'll leak? Any? I mean, because it must
Any
be.
minute
It
now.
must be very much in the works at this point. Taking a turn away from that, I saw my first January fashion magazine today, January '09 fashion magazine. It was Elle magazine.
You're ahead of me.
Well, and not on purpose. It was just an accident. But it was so thin. It was shockingly thin. And when I looked through it, I thought this is probably the first magazines to come out, the January '09, that will have been affected by what was coming down in September. Because the magazines we saw in September, October, November, December, they were already in the pipeline. The fashion shoots had been done, the editorial had been done, the ads had been bought. But when I looked at this copy of Elle, I thought this probably reflects the new normal for fashion,
reality.
the new reality. And is that what you're hearing? I mean, is that what you're sensing, that there is this pulling back, that the ad dollars are going to go down, that the stores are going to be buying less, that everything is, because they can't have 70% discounts forever. I don't.
Although it seems like they will try.
Well, I mean, we benefit, but I
Right.
look at all these stores with these deep discounts, and I think at a certain point that becomes diminishing returns.
Yeah. Well, January, I will say, is typically a very tiny
Thin.
book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're all feeling that stress of advertisers having to pull back, of saying goodbye to the once held belief that people who have money will continue to buy,
Yeah.
and they're not doing that.
Well, and they're not they aren't the larger number anyway.
Right, but I mean, for a lot of those luxury ads that are in the magazines, there's a
It's
sense
their
that
statement.
that market will, sort of be the last to crumble. And I think what'll be interesting is to see what designers decide to do come, runway shows that are looking at fall. But what several retailers, have said is that, when they buy, there's a belief that they have to focus even more on sort of the emotional purchase,
Right.
the thing that is irresistible,
Right.
because no one's going to buy another black turtleneck. And the people, though, that I think will be most affected are going to be, sort of those people who are like the last to see retail dollars, which are those smaller design houses, the ones who don't have a lot of clout, the ones who are fairly young, the ones who don't have an in-store boutique.
It's like anybody who feels
the
a crunch in
department
an
store.
economic downturn. It's the little
Exactly.
guy.
I mean, the Ralph Lauren boutique in these department stores is still going to be filled with Ralph Lauren merchandise. But
And yet Gap is closing in a lot of places. Gap is closing right here in Georgetown. And you hear rumblings about other retail stores that are in a lot of trouble.
And in some ways, the retail industry has already seen such an incredible contraction.
Yeah.
I mean, with the disappearance of all these once known local department store names, that, I mean, I almost ask myself, I mean, is it possible for it to contract anymore?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Where do you go, or do you just fold up your tent altogether?
Right, you start folding up particular outlets, but I think also what happens is you see merchandise that becomes even more watered down.
Do the discount sort of copycat stores like H&M and Zara, have they made a big difference? I mean, I know they're everywhere, but have they cut into anything in a significant way?
I think it's a debatable point. On the one hand, the argument is that the same customer who is looking to buy a designer brand is not the same customer who's going into H&M and buying sort of the $15 version of it.
Right.
But I think that logic actually is wrong, and I think it does probably cut into the sales of the higher end. But at the same time, on sort of in a broader way, I think it's really sort of culturally a positive thing.